How you doing, readers? We're back for yet another day, and could be for a while. It seems like. Hope everybody is staying healthy and safe. And I'm back today with another book talk. I told you that I was going to spend the first couple of videos talking about some of my books, especially for some students who are in schools where I was scheduled to go and appear, talk about some of my books there, and I have a chance to meet readers face to face. And of course, all of those schools are now doing distance learning, and they're not at the physical buildings. One of those places that I missed out on that I really wish I would have had a chance to go to was the Virginia Festival of the Book, which was supposed to happen last week and did not. I was supposed to visit about 9 different middle school and I think a high school in the area, and that would have been just a great experience. Have a chance to reach out to readers, talk to them about my books. It's always exciting when you get a chance to have readers in front of you, but unfortunately that did not happen. So of course I'm all about making lemonade out of lemons, and hopefully these book talks that I'm putting up here on YouTube will give your students a chance to at least hear me speak, even though they're looking at it on a screen instead of being right in front of them. So today I am here to talk to you about my latest novel. It's actually part of a series, the Please Return To series. It is targeted at a middle grade or middle school audience, grades 4th through 7th. I think an 8th grader would probably still enjoy this book as well. Adults also could probably enjoy it, so really, really decent for pretty much anybody. But it is, like I said, the second book in the series, and it really takes the story of Norbert M. Finkelstein, kind of takes it a lot further. We learn about a bunch of new characters living in the area of Mapleton, which is the town that I created for this story. Wrestling is also a major point in the story as well, but instead of it just being kind of amateurish wrestling, we get kind of into the lucha libre style of wrestling, which is made famous in both Japan and especially in Mexico. And I've just always been fascinated with that kind of wrestling. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the book, and give you a little bit of background as well. The book is called, obviously, Please Return to Toby Solano. As you can see from behind me, there's the cover for Please Return to Norbert M. Finkelstein. I've mentioned this a bunch of times, but it's basically the same cover with some additions made to it. It was really cool how the designer tried to make this book look a little bit older or aged and weathered. You can see that some of the stickers that were on the original ones appear to be like torn off. We have a cricket up here which comes into the story. You can see on the back cover here is pretty cool. There's a lot of really neat illustrations in here done again by Alexandra Frey. Here's one of them. El Machina happens to be a nickname or wrestling identity, I should say, for Toby, or at least his aspirational wrestling identity. And I guess that's where I'll start with this book. Like I said in a previous video, Norbert M. Finkelstein, the first book in this series, I had never really intended to publish it. It was written as a labor of love, mostly just so that Alex and I we can entertain ourselves, lift our spirits when our dog Mike was not doing so well. And basically Norbert M. Finkelstein is a character that we created out of some of the character traits that existed within my dog. To say the most weird thing I've ever said out loud, but that's 100% the truth. So when that book came out, and I knew that the whole idea of this was that we were going to be turning it into a series, the first thing I thought about was who was going to carry the rest of this series. I had lots of people who criticized me about the first book for creating a narrator that was an adult for a middle grade book, which isn't done often. But I was so adamant about that. First of all, I'm a teacher. I'm an adult myself. I talk to middle school students all the time. They talk to adults all the time. We're always part of each other's lives. We can help each other in different ways because we have different perspectives. And I just thought that there really aren't enough books. I felt the opposite of what other people were telling me. I felt that instead of, wow, nobody ever does this, I thought, wow, nobody ever does this. This is something that we're missing in literature. So that's why I created Norbert M. Finkelstein. But I always knew in my heart that, when this turned into a series, there was going to need to be another character or a series of characters, in fact, carrying the narration of it. So Toby Solano became that character. Like I said in the first book, the whole premise behind it is that somebody has found Norbert M. Finkelstein's secret journal, which unlocks his secret wrestling identity and his life that he spends at night after the classroom. So Toby Solano happens to be that character. And in the first book, you kind of read Norby's journal along with him without really being aware that Toby exists until you get to the very last chapter, and it becomes pretty apparent that there is somebody holding on to this journal. Well, in the very first chapter of this book, or really the first journal entry of this book, because it is set up like a journal again, you find out that Toby Solano is that person. And Toby Solano's backstory is that he is from El Paso, Texas, a place that's very different from Mapleton in all respects. It is more diverse. Food's different. The weather and the temperature there is different. Everything about it is different. And Toby happened to have loved El Paso. He loved the culture there. One of the things that was really important in his life was the wrestling community there. Being so close to Mexico, lucha libre style wrestling is pretty important. His dad is actually a luchador, which is a traditional Mexican wrestler who has been injured in the ring and is now going on to try to like recoup his career, and he has to go back to Mexico City to meet up with his original trainer to do so, which separates Toby and his mother from his father. At the same time, one thing you start to find out is that Toby Solano, he's kind of a bully. Not because he wants to be a bully, but because at some point in his life he was bullied himself, and he found that by being the bully instead, he was able to avoid the bullying, which isn't a very good, effective way of going about this. But it is part of his character. And what happens is that in his school in El Paso, Toby pulls some kind of a prank on another student, and it gets him kicked out of school. And it also gets his mom, who's a teacher at the school, gets the principal to ask her to leave the school as well, which is what lands them in Mapleton. They move to another town to kind of restart their lives. And they move there without Toby's father. So that's where the book begins. And what you find out very quickly is that Toby hates Mapleton. He doesn't like anybody there. He doesn't seem to fit in at all. He doesn't relate to any of the people that live there, and especially doesn't relate to his teacher, Mr. Finkelstein, whose journal he found on his very first day in Mapleton as the moving truck was pulling away. And what he finds out before he actually even attends class is that he's not a really big fan of any of his classmates either, or any of their behaviors. He doesn't think they know enough about wrestling. He feels like the MWF, which is the amateurish wrestling, company that takes place in Mapleton, he feels like it's a joke. And he feels like the Mortician, who is Norbert M. Finkelstein's wrestling identity, is maybe one of the worst wrestlers and the worst wrestling identities of all time. And he doesn't leave any of this up to the reader's imagination. He tells people straight out. So the book itself, from that point, takes us on Toby's journey from being kind of a bully in his old town and being kind of held accountable for that, to trying to find a new identity for himself. The book itself is a lot about identity, understanding who you are. Wrestling, I feel like, at least professional wrestling, is all about identity. It's all about who you can be when, who you want to be and who you can make yourself be and who you can make other people believe you are. And sometimes that identity is very close to your real identity. Sometimes that identity is far from your real identity. And I think that's what Toby Solano in this book grapples with. Not only is he trying to fit in with his classmates, not only is he trying to get used to a new town, not only is he trying to live a life away from one of his parents who he really misses a lot, but he's also trying to move into the world of what he calls fake wrestling, which is actually real wrestling, Greco-Roman style, which you might be on a wrestling team at your school, that style of wrestling. He tries to learn about that style of wrestling and, ingrain himself in the school by joining the team. And he's not as successful at that style of wrestling as he was, learning the techniques that his father had shown him back in El Paso. So it's kind of a learning curve for him. He feels kind of like a fish out of water in a lot of respects. He meets a couple of other characters from Norbert Finkelstein's class from the original book, who help guide him. Even some unlikely characters who at first he winds up engaging in a major prank war with, but then eventually they become allies. But by the time we get middle of the way to the end of the book, a lot of this kind of stems its way back to Norbert. And Norbert trying to make a comeback into the wrestling world after having been defeated early on in this particular story. And Toby and some of his friends become the new training team for Norby and try to help him, regain his crown in the MWF. And along the way, lots of really interesting things happen. Family lives collide and come back together. And it's really just kind of a fun, hilarious book with lots of new characters, crazy wrestling identities, all kinds of really awesome illustrations that just make the book come to life. So I just want to read you the first chapter, just tell you a couple of other things, especially about the illustrations and about some of the hard parts of writing this particular book. And then I'll let you out of here so that you can go back to probably being bored. So just wanted to just read a couple of really cool endorsements that the book has already gotten, just so you can see that other authors out there have read this and they think that it's kind of a really awesome book. But Landis Wade, he is the host of the Charlotte Readers podcast. If you're looking for something to do and you want to hear lots of book talks and learn about authors' lives and their books, Charlotte Readers podcast, available on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, pretty much anywhere you do a search. It's got to be one of the best book podcasts I've ever listened to. But Landis, great host, also an author on his own of a book called The Christmas Redemption. He said, no matter your age, you can't help but smile at the middle school life of one Toby El Machina Solano. Thanks to the clever storytelling of Frank Morelli, that's me, you soon realize that young Toby is just a boy who wants to fit in, and you find yourself cheering wholeheartedly for El Machina to win his place in the world. I thought that was really kind words. I think he hit it right on the head, exactly what I was trying to do with this book. Having people root for this boy who at one point in the story is a bully, then he becomes the bullied, then he goes back to being a bully, and he's really just kind of struggles with that. And it kind of is a cool perspective on how the whole, circular pattern of bullying in schools kind of takes place and why it happens and how we can avoid it. Another quick one. Catherine Harrison, a Canadian author, she wrote a really awesome picture book called Weeds in Nana's Garden, which is an Alzheimer's book. Explains to young children how they can make sense of the differences going on in their grandparents. And Catherine said, what was there not to like about the mischievous wrestling know-it-all new kid Toby Solano? His cheeky, resourceful, and courageous efforts at managing life in a new place and a new school never ceased to entertain and amuse. Hilarious, spirited, and relatable for kids in middle school. So there's just a couple. There are some more inside the book. You can actually see them if you go to Amazon and click on the preview button at the top of the page of the book page, and you can see all the rest of it. You can actually see the inside of the book, a few of the pages as well, just so you can see the cover again. And just a reminder that you can pre-order it and then order it because we're pretty close to the release date. If you're watching this video after that time, but March 27th is the release date. You could pre-order it on Amazon, IndieBound, which is probably the best place to order it from, so you can help out indie bookstores. You can order it directly through Sunrise Books, which you can find on IndieBound.com, or on my website, which you see up here. I think I'm pointing to it correctly, FrankMorelliWrites.com, or on Twitter, you can DM me at FrankMorWriter. There's no .com there. I don't know what I'm talking about. Or on Instagram at Frank Morelli Author. If you need to have any directions of how to order it, I can direct you there. But on my website, you should be able to find a link to Sunrise Books if you're interested in receiving a signed copy of really any of the books that you see here on the screen. No Sad Songs or the first book in the series, Please Return to Norbert M. Finkelstein. Let me read you a selection just so you can kind of hear Toby's voice, see how it's a little bit different. And I'll talk about that in a little bit after I read you this chapter. Monday, January 7th, as you can see, this book begins right after holiday break. That's when Toby kind of winds up in Mapleton. I don't know what I did to end up in this town, in Mapleton, at least 1,000,000 miles away from my home in El Paso, Texas, where I mattered, where I could snap my fingers and get my math homework done for me, or squint my eyes down tight and give another kid one of those stares that says, get your butt out of my seat before I pile drive you. And the kid would scram, or wet his pants and keep the seat. But here in Mapleton, I'm anything but king. I'm barely a speck of dust on an old box of nonsense you have stored deep in the back of the attic, you'll never notice it or find it another use for it again. I'm like the invisible man, which is weird because I'm hard to miss. I'm more like the invisible blob, oozing outside the hems of my t-shirt and over the bounds of my desk chair combo as I sit in the back of Mr. Finkelstein's class and give a little grunt when he calls out, Toby Solano. And when he ticks the box off for present next to my name, is the only real evidence of my existence in this town. Well, other than this stupid journal. I just started writing in it today, so now there's a paper trail. I got the idea about 2 weeks ago, even though I didn't know it at the time. That's when the moving trucks pulled away from the curb and kicked up something ratty and torn at the edges, and it was covered in grease from getting kicked around the street so many times. Mom was on the phone with a real estate agent, so she didn't notice me smuggle a disgusting piece of garbage into my new room. And Dad? Well, he didn't notice because he's not here, and I doubt he ever will be. It's not like I can blame him, because Mapleton's a dump, and it's filled with the most annoying people on the face of the planet. At least that's what I learned in the journal I found, because that's what it turned out to be. The mysterious object, I mean. And it wasn't an ordinary journal, either. It was written by the most bizarre and ridiculous teacher who's ever lived. And I read it. That's right. I read every last word, because that's what you do when you move to a new town. It's just you and your mom, and you have no friends, and you find a weird journal. You can't blame me for that. But all I learned was what I already knew when Mom said, "We're here!" And I looked through the windshield, and the first thing I saw was an orange highway cone. A common obstacle in the middle of the roadway. Not a cactus, or a longhorn steer, or the open Texas sky stretched wide above us. Nope. It was a highway cone, set up strategically between me and my real life, between me and my dad, between me and mattering. At least that's what Finkelstein's little diary told me. Warned me is probably a more accurate way of saying it, because that's where I learned about sniveling crybabies like Jimmy Baker and know-it-alls like Maya Providence. It's where I found out about the Mortician, possibly the crappiest wrestler of all time, with an even dumber name. If I didn't spend my first 2 weeks in Mapleton laughing at the fools on the pages of Finkelstein's journal, I'd be forced to admit I completely wasted my holiday break sulking around in my new room. Imagine my surprise last week when Mom and I showed up at Mapleton Middle School for our first days. She's a teacher, by the way. And I found out the same fools I've been reading about are my new classmates. And the biggest buffoon of them all, Norbert M. Finkelstein, is my new teacher. Today was only my 4th full day in school in this dumpster fire. And if anything, I found the Jimmy Bakers and the Derek Meeks and the Mandy Malamars of the world to be at least 20 times more insufferable than they appeared on the pages of my teacher's journal. For one, they're so focused on their petty little lives they don't have a spare second to say hello to the new kid in town. Like I'm some overinflated ghost with spiky black hair that passes directly through walls and their attention spans with the same level of detection. None. On top of that, they're all a bunch of kiss-ups to their Lord and Savior, Mr. Finkelstein. Each and every one of them. They think the Mortician is some kind of intergalactic wrestling superstar, but I've got news for them. I climbed out my bedroom window last week and caught a few bouts at the MWF down at Mapleton Auditorium, and it's not exactly what I'd call wrestling at the highest level, even if the cheesy banner outside the event would lead you to believe so. I mean, I'm surprised most of these 2-bit wrestlers in Mapleton are allowed to own a driver's license, let alone take to the ring to battle it out in one of the world's oldest and most revered sports. And the final nap? Ha! No pun intended, but my dad wouldn't be caught dead trying to perform the Mortician's wimpy finishing move. That's because my dad is a luchador. To put it simply, he's a real wrestler. If you want a better definition, see a longer one. A luchador is a traditional Mexican wrestler who fights in the lucha libre style, which means my dad kicks your butt with a brutal combination of high-flying kicks, slams, and acrobatic aerial stunts from the top rope. And he wears a máscara, a mask. It hides his true identity from all his screaming fans, and it's flashy and loaded down with all kinds of cool designs. My dad's máscara is so much tougher than the stupid piece of fabric that covers Mr. Finkelstein's face in the ring. Maybe it's because my dad's a much better wrestler, a professional, or at least he used to be, until he destroyed his knee in a match and got stripped of all his belts, and then told me one night he had to go back to Mexico City to get right, he told me. But I knew what he meant. He needed to focus. He needed to simplify his life. He needed to get as far from me and Mom as he could, if he ever wanted to be Carlos El Charisma Solano again. So that's just a section of the first journal entry in there. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of the kind of character that Toby Solano is and how he kind of complains his way through life. How he points out things that, probably he's guilty of himself, and how he is essentially, set up to become a bully once again in Mapleton just based upon his observations of his classmates. He's not really giving them a lot of credit. He doesn't even know them yet. He's basing his knowledge just on stories that he's read in the journal. But the story itself is really kind of fun to write and also challenging. Like I said, I decided to switch narrators, so that meant that I had to create a book that didn't sound the same as the first book, and otherwise you would feel like Norbert M. Finkelstein was narrating. So instead I had to kind of get into the head of Toby Solano. I had to do a lot of character studies. I use a technique known as Proust questionnaire, which is a technique that I'll actually post another video about when you're trying to do character development in your class. I'll have another video about that, how to go about doing it. But essentially it means answering a long list of questions as if you are the character and getting into their head. And in doing so, it helped me to really kind of get his voice down. And you can notice that he sounds a lot different than Norby. Because he is an essential middle school student and, kind of has a different perspective on things than Norbert does. The other cool part about that was also being able to team up with Alexandra Frey, who's the illustrator. I can't draw for the life of me, but she is an incredibly talented artist. And the fact that we live in such close proximity to each other, literally the same house, allowed us to really talk about the illustrations and what should be illustrated and especially how Toby would illustrate versus how Norby illustrated. So you'll notice that when you open this book up, the illustrations definitely look different. They're placed differently. They're different size than many of the larger illustrations that were in Norbert M. Finkelstein. But a lot of that's because we were trying to give the book the feel that Toby was the one holding on to this journal now. And you're going to see that if you read these two books and decide to read the next book in the series, the third book, which I'm starting to work on right now, that those illustrations and writing style take a completely different turn as well. Which is one of the fun things about being a writer. It's about being able to stand in somebody else's shoes. I'm not a traditional Mexican wrestler myself. I'm not Mexican, but I know quite a bit about wrestling. I've been a wrestling fan most of my life, and I'm a researcher and an observer, and it was really fun to kind of and also kind of eye-opening to be able to stand inside the shoes of a character that's different from me, to learn from them. And to be instructed by them. And I think that, honestly, in literature and in art in general, that's one of the most important things. So it was kind of fun to be able to work alongside an illustrator who, in her medium, was doing the exact same thing as I was as a writer, trying to be able to change her style to match the style of the character. And I guess if you're able to do that, I guess if you're motivated enough to do that, that means you've created a pretty appealing and interesting character. So that is Toby Solano. I hope that you will have a chance to pick up a copy of the book. Like I said, you can order it on Amazon.com, on IndieBound, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere anywhere they sell books. But like I said, if you're interested in a signed copy, go on IndieBound and search Sunrise Books, and you can order through them. You could also find a link to them I'll point up here again, at my website, frankmorellywrites.com. I hope you enjoyed the book talk today. I'll probably be back again soon with some more Q&A style questions and definitely a few more teacher type of things, some resources for you all. Hope you stay happy. Hope you stay healthy. Hope you stay safe. Have a good one.